These days, our social media, computer and surveillance technologies make it very difficult for a person to vanish into obscurity. Most of us would be leaving traces of our existence, which would emerge whether in the form of bank records, CCTV footage or phone tracking. However, until as recently as the 1990s, there were not these forms of checking on a person's continued existence, making disappearances easy for someone wanting to reinvent themselves, or heartbreakingly difficult to solve for those left behind. Here are 3 missing person cases with a twist, and still confounding to this day. Number 3. Lawrence Bader. In 1957, Lawrence was a cookware salesman and archery enthusiast living in Akron, Ohio, with his pregnant wife and 3 children. He decided to ignore a severe storm forecast and take a boat out on Lake Erie. However, his boat was found the next day, slightly damaged and missing an oar, so it was assumed to have foundered in the storm. The lake was searched by rescuers, but Bader was never found. His family received $40,000 in life insurance, a large sum in those days. 8 years later, a family friend was in Chicago at an archery tournament when he noticed a man who looked eerily like Lawrence Bader. Bader's double was a flamboyant radio and television personality in Omaha, Nebraska, called John Fritz Johnson. The acquaintance brought Bader's 21-year-old niece Suzanne to meet him, and despite his new moustache and eye patch, due to a tumour having caused his eye to be removed, she immediately recognised him. However, Fritz Johnson insisted that it was not Bader. He claimed to have been raised in a children's home and then to have spent 14 years doing Navy service before moving to Omaha, where he now had a wife and 2 children. Significantly, he had serviced in Omaha 4 days after Bader's disappearance, from when he had slowly risen to his popular public profile. Suzanne then brought in Bader's 2 brothers from Akron, who compared Johnson's fingerprints to those in Bader's military records. To his own seeming shock, Johnson's prints were a perfect match for Bader's. Johnson's life disintegrated almost immediately, his reputation in tatters. He lost his television job and his marriage was annulled. His first wife had to pay back her insurance money and renege on marriage plans with a fiancé. After 10 days of analysis by a team of psychiatrists, it was determined that Johnson, or Bader, suffered from a rare amnesia condition which had not only cleared his mind of any memories of his life as Bader, but had also implanted false memories of his past. They conceded, however, that Bader did have reason to conspire to start afresh. He was heavily in debt and had not paid taxes for years. The real answer would forever remain a mystery, as the tumour in his eye re-emerged and claimed his life before psychiatrists were able to conclude what had really happened. Number 2. Bobby Dunbar. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared during a fishing trip with his well-to-do family at Swayze Lake in Louisiana. Hundreds of volunteer rescuers searched the swamp, dissecting alligators and dynamiting the water, hopeful of discovering little Bobby's body. But in vain. 8 months into a nationwide search and fueled by frenzied press coverage, the Dunbar family received wonderful news. A child of Bobby's appearance had been located in Mississippi, travelling with an itinerant piano repairer called William Cantwell Walters. Walters insisted the boy was his nephew Bruce and the son of his brother, and an unmarried field hand employed by his family named Julia Anderson. The Dunbar family at first hesitant went on to identify Bruce as their missing Bobby from a similar mole and burn scar on his left foot. Julia Anderson was adamant that Bruce was her son, and townspeople from where Walters had travelled confirmed seeing the boy with him before Bobby's disappearance. But with very public questioning of her moral character and her inability to pay for legal help, Anderson lost custody of the boy to the Dunbars. Walters served time in prison for kidnapping, but was released sooner than expected on appeal. Then a technicality. Bobby Dunbar returned to the family home in Opelousas with a great fanfare and celebratory parade, and grew to maturity in the Dunbar family. He eventually married and had his own family with 4 children, living a full and happy life until his passing in 1966. Then came DNA testing. One of Bobby's granddaughters decided to research the case, wanting to prove once and for all that Bobby was indeed a Dunbar. She convinced the father, Bob Dunbar Jr., to undergo a DNA test, the results of which showed that he was not related to Bobby's younger brother and had no genetic ties to the Dunbar family. This exonerated Walters and Anderson, but alienated the other supposed descendants of Bobby Dunbar, the man who had lived out the last 5 decades of his life with the wrong identity. The granddaughter theorised that the real Bobby Dunbar had in fact been taken by an alligator on Swayze Lake, but with no way of finding any evidence, his disappearance will remain a mystery forever. Number 1. Natasha Ryan. In 1998, a 14-year-old girl called Natasha Ryan vanished from her hometown of Rockhampton in Queensland, Australia, after being dropped off to school by her mother. After an exhaustive police search, no clues were found as to her whereabouts. After being listed as a missing person for 5 years, Natasha's mysterious disappearance was eventually attributed to Leonard Fraser. He was a known violent serial offender who had been imprisoned for the slaying of a young girl. In order to be separated from other prisoners, Fraser confessed to the disappearance of 4 girls, one of whom was Natasha Ryan. As the remains of 3 other victims had been found, Natasha was assumed to have met the same fate. Fraser had even given a fellow prisoner a detailed map showing where she could be found. However, after 4 years of searching, Natasha's remains has still not been located, but on the basis of Fraser's confession, the authorities assumed she was deceased. In 2001, her grief-stricken family held a memorial service for her, and Fraser stood trial for the crime in 2003. However, bizarrely, police received an anonymous tip, which led them to raid the home of Natasha's boyfriend, Scott Black. He lived in a nearby suburb, 2.5 miles away from the house where Natasha's family lived. Natasha was hiding inside a wardrobe there. She and Scott had been sharing a house in Yeppoon, elsewhere in Queensland, for 5 years and had moved back to Rockhampton 6 months previously for Scott's job. Despite immediate pitch to the contrary, Natasha had not been living in the cupboard for 6 years, but walked around the house with curtains closed and made night trips to the beach. Natasha explained her inaction in not coming forward by saying the lie had become too big, and hinted at having had valid reasons for leaving home. Weirdly, she attended Fraser's court hearing, her own inquest trial, to answer questions. As Scott had lied under oath about Natasha's disappearance, he spent a year in jail for perjury, but the couple regrouped and made over $300,000 in media deals for interviews and wedding publicity. They're still together to this day and have 3 children, but have well and truly withdrawn from the limelight.